When I was asked to pay tribute to John Clarke, my first reaction was to keep quiet and privately reflect on our 30-year partnership. He would do the same if it were me. Well, he's not here to argue, so I'm doing it. When we were heading to record the very first Clarke and Dora on television, we got in the car and John said to me, "All right, let's go and stick some ferrets down some trousers." Little did we know we'd be doing just that together for the next 3 decades. And if there was mischief to be made, John made it. Always with a wicked twinkle in his eye, inviting you to join in. But he was also much more than Clarke and Dora. And it's impossible to sum up a man who strode across such a huge creative canvas for half a century in 2 countries. He was not only one of the funniest people to grace our lives, above all, he was an incredibly kind human being. John Clarke, thanks for your time.
Well, don't you think there's an element of greed in all this?
There's certainly an element of greed. We're all agreed, and we've been agreed for some considerable length of time, and I should imagine we will continue to be agreed.
I first met John at Victoria University about 47 years ago, 1970. He was beginning to come out of sketch comedy, and I thought, I'm looking at some kind of a genius in embryo of some kind. And he was playing kind of Kiwi blokes, and one of these characters that emerged was a character called Fred Dagg.
Now, there's a fair amount of research going on at the present moment in time, into alcoholism in sheep and 1 or 2 of the ramifications thereof. Now, these sheep here at the moment have been drinking since 9 o'clock this morning, and you might notice some of them are a little bit fuzzy around the edges. By mid-afternoon they'll be doubled in number.
He didn't have to actually do anything to be funny. He just had to walk on gumboots and say,
"Yeah, g'day."
He loved radio. When he was a kid, he used to just listen to the radio all the time. We had, when we were kids, in the house, every episode of The Goons on cassette tape, do you remember? With his
perfectly catalogued, handwritten
cassettes.
Full
all
drawers of them.
in order.
Oh, yes.
all of John's characters were kind of a variation of the Australian or the New Zealand bloke that he found inherently funny. And I don't think any of us had actually considered that before, that New Zealand blokes could be funny.
The wool clip that we get off this particular place is now not getting half the money we were getting, and as a result, sheep, well, quite frankly, they don't pay.
I love the thing in Country Calendar where they didn't make much money on the wool clip last year, so they're trying to clip it back onto the sheep. Last year's fleece is being reattached.
Sticker on. These are the wrong size.
It's just such a fantastic idea. After he finished university, and he did 2 degrees but finished neither of them, John left for London to get his overseas experience.
When we shot Barry Mackenzie in London, we found it very, very difficult to find anyone who could do an Australian accent. It was Australians who went to work as actors in the UK, got rid of the accent en route because it was going to be professionally deadly. So we found that New Zealanders were a close enough approximation.
Hey, Bazza, you might be onto something there, mate. Yeah? Yeah, some of those Sheilas who don't look so hot are great little performers. Go on. Yeah.
I hope I get this right. Bazza goes off to something like the Young Conservatives dinner dance.
But he managed to make it a beautiful moment because as Barry Mackenzie's leaving the pub, he says, "See you later, fellas."
All the other Australians are going, "See ya, Bazza," and "See ya." As he walks out, he walks past John, who's not yelling out. He walks past John, who's got his can of beer to his lips, and he goes.
It was just such a small little thing, but said so much, like a beautiful idea.
See you, fellas. See you, guys.
It's just the old, no, I'm not pulling the beer away from my lips to say goodbye. It's just the old-fashioned, Yeah, it's magnificent.
Then he came back to New Zealand, enjoyed enormous success for 4 or 5 years as Fred Dagg. And Fred Dagg became a sort of monster, I think.
Now, obviously, the first thing to decide is what sort of novelist you'd like to be. A tall novelist, a short novelist, or in fact a novelist of medium stature. Perhaps a modern novelist, a neoclassicist, or a pastoral stream of consciousness Gothic feminist. Now, next, you're halfway there when you've done that, incidentally. Next, you've got to sit down and pound out your actual novel, beginning each new sentence with a capital, of course, and remembering to number the pages very carefully indeed. There's nothing more frustrating to the reader than getting right through a novel and discovering that it was read in completely the wrong order.
He was as big in New Zealand as the young Paul Hogan was in Australia.
So famous, so painfully famous, that I think it all but consumed him.
He was as big as the Beatles, kind of. It seemed like that. There was sort of a... And I think it would have been pretty tough for him, in that he wouldn't have been able to leave the house without people mistaking him for Fred Dagg. And it became necessary for John to leave New Zealand and leave Fred behind. Australia kind of liberated him. Yeah, it was a liberation.
I did mostly radio when I first got here because I didn't feel I could come here and just walk in and go, well, I'll just, you know, hang my shingle up and away we go. Because I'd never lived here for a long time. I didn't know the sub-language. I didn't understand the football. I didn't know the place names. It wasn't my history. So I needed to lie low for a while and learn.
He actually just observed Australia for a few years just to kind of get an angle on the nuances and the culture, instead of just jumping right in going, well, I was big there, so I could instantly be big here.
I hired John and Andrew Knight to work at a little film company called Adams Packer. We all knew that he was a raving genius.
Then we went on and we shared an office for, I don't know, about 4 years, and we did a series together, 2 series together for the ABC.
Listen, we just had some members of the police force pay us a social call.
Ah. My name come up?
Afraid so. If you were planning a little holiday, it might be an idea to bring the date forward a bit.
How'd they find out?
Buggery fine, huh?
Oh, well, I thought things were going a bit well.
The first thing that happens with John when you work in a room with him is virtually nothing. We would go into the office every day, we would sit down, we'd make a cup of tea, and we would sit and we would talk for sometimes 4 hours straight without having written a word. And then we would usually go for a swim and we'd say, we've really got to get back to work. And then John would usually go off and talk to someone like the pool attendant for another hour. And then he would come back and we'd go, well, we're hungry, we better go and eat. And then we would eat and we would talk for another hour about nothing.
I don't know how the process worked. All I know is that his wife, Helen, still has one of her favourite photographs, she says, and that is of John and I sitting at their kitchen table up in the hills. And every time she would walk past, she would say, how are you going? And we would always say, just putting on the finishing touches.
I would say, but John, we haven't written anything. And then he'd go, oh, okay, all right. And in an hour, the last hour of the day, half an hour of the day, we would actually do the work. But what was extraordinary about John was that everything that had happened that day, everything we'd talked about, in his head he'd shaped it. And it just went straight down on paper.
I'm sure everyone will say, John loved a long chat.
John, did you hear about the Bolivian soccer team?
Morning, Gina. No, I've spent most of the morning in the company of Michael Schumacher's considerably less talented brother Trevor Schumacher, who's had the shock absorbers taken out of his taxi, Gina, and he's picking a few bob up driving the wrong way up one-way streets all over Sydney at the speed of sound. Tell me about the Bolivian soccer team.
Everywhere Dad went, he chatted. He used to leave the house and say he was going down to the office. He had lots of very important things to do and he couldn't possibly come with us to do whatever it was that we were off to do. And we'd call the office in 10 minutes. Took him 10 minutes to get to the office. Wasn't there. Call him back half an hour later, not there. Call him back an hour later, he still hadn't arrived. But he'd had some great chats in the street between the house and the office.
There was a lot of Annie Maver, our first assistant director, there was a lot of him talking and her sort of dragging him as he's talking with the sort of Kleenexes in, somebody's taking those out and powderings, and he's just still chatting.
You get John on the phone, that's it. Just you can sign your, that's an hour.
My wife would say, if it's John, don't answer it. And of course, you have to answer to John because it's the most entertaining hour of your life.
Now, another very important aspect of our work is phone tapping, because all sorts of communistic nonsense gets spoken over telephone. So we tap the phones like this with a special tapper that we're provided with by the Brigadier, and no communistic conversation can sneak through here anymore.
And as a very dear friend of his said from New Zealand to me on the phone the other day, John won't be in heaven yet. And I said, why is that? And he said, he'll still be at the gate talking to the gatekeeper. And that's how John was. He would talk to anyone.
It filled your life with fun and made you think as well.
That's right. And I guess the first time as a teenager when I got into comedy was watching the Gillies Report.
I want you to be in charge of programming.
Are you having a borrow of me, Arthur?
Never more serious, Terry. Never more Lambeth in my ear hole.
What do I know about television programs?
The Gillies Report was and remains the apotheosis of Australian satire. John was a contributing writer who then became a somewhat reluctant participant.
What genuine need is there for foreign banks when we've had a very wide range of Australian banks here for almost 100 years?
Well, yes. I'm bound to say that I agree with what's already been said about improvement in customer services. I think that's perfectly obvious. I think that's going to manifest itself relatively early. I think that if you're asking what's going to happen to the Australian domestic economy in a macroeconomic sense, then...
He had told me, and I hadn't paid enough attention, I think, to the fact that the reason he left New Zealand was he wanted to get away from the oppression that he'd felt as a performer. But then once he started to join us, the ideas just kept coming. He did a series of politicians as phantasmagorical birds.
Would it be true to say that you own most of the world?
No, only the free world.
Most of the free world?
Yes, that would be true.
How did you do that?
I bought it.
Is there any corruption in New South Wales?
No whatsoever. No corruption in New South Wales, no.
Well, come on, surely there's always been corruption in New South Wales in the 60s and the 50s.
There has been in the past, yes, but we've researched it, we've looked into it, and those people have given it away.
But then on top of that, there was farnarkling.
Farnarkling history was made last night in Madrid when Australia confounded the experts and bundled Scotland out of an incident-packed semi-final in front of an estimated crowd. Once again, the very dexterous Dave Sorensen dominated the attacking phase and after a short time was arkling from all points of the compass. Unfortunately, he suffered a spectacular mishap in the middle of the fourth warble when he dislodged a pinion in the goalpost housing and impaled himself on the southern wall.
And all these wonderful ideas for production numbers that we did as semi-musicals.
Order, by order of the Governor-General, this Parliament has ceased to be. It is no more, it has gone to meet its maker, it is an ex-Parliament, it is completely bugled, the taxidermist is on his way. Sit down!
In the end, he became central to the show. We couldn't have done it without him.
Shut up! Sit, I give up.
I got the job as head of radio comedy and unit, that's right, and I was the unit. It was just me. And so the first thing I thought of, who am I going to get? And of course, John Clarke is the obvious person.
John rang me one night and said, I think I've worked out how to make a living for the next 10 years. And I said, oh yeah, what's that?
Mr. Howard, thank you for your time. You're a very busy man.
Oh, it's cool.
My friends aren't going to believe this.
Oh, you're very kind.
Do you get a lot of fan mail?
Yeah, tons of it. I don't reply to it all, but, you know, I'd like to, but it's not possible.
Dad was delighted with Brian's warm, lovely voice and what he described as a preternatural understanding of natural speech rhythms.
So I thought, wow, this is all right. So I sent this around to all the different ABC stations, and the audience, God bless them, as they always did, grabbed hold of it and loved it, and it was a year later we ended up going to Channel 9.
Mr. Kennett, thanks for joining us.
Thank you very much for inviting me in. It's a great pleasure to be here.
Mr. Kennett, would it be fair to say that all you've got to do to become Premier of Victoria is to keep your nose clean and not alienate the electorate?
Why don't you shut up, you stupid fat idiot?
We didn't dress up and we didn't do voices. And that was a product of having done it on radio for a year. It just seemed silly to go and do it any other way.
Mr. Bond, how have you been?
Oh, pretty good, thanks. Yeah, fine.
How are things going?
Oh, a bunch of fluffy ducks.
The acceptance of what we were doing on Channel 9 came very quickly, and that's because we had Yarn Events in Parramatta, and she sold it for us.
Do you pay tax as a matter of interest?
I do.
Well, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much. I admire the poor. I admire them enormously. My God, you're an admirable group.
Mr. Bond, thank you for your time.
Well, thank you.
Oh, John Clarke using one of his many aliases. That's it for tonight and this week. Have a great weekend. Good night.
I remember one skit he did he played Bob Hawke and he played me, and it was about the time I replaced Bob as Prime Minister, and so it's a contest from our particular points of view, you know. But he had it pretty right.
Well, look, you know, Bob came to me at one stage and said he was thinking of getting out, you know, giving me a go. I mean, you know, and I said, you know, thanks, Bob. Well, no, Paul's recollection is simply not accurate.
It is delicious. He's more Keating than Paul, he's more Hawke than Bob.
Well, I don't think there's any doubt in anybody's mind that Paul was a very able fellow. It was just that he didn't have the maturity and breadth of vision that was going to be required in Australia at that time.
I remember a night, he and I went to the opening night of Keating the Musical, and there was an after party, and we went to the after party and Keating himself was there. And he came over and John was very keen to have Keating to himself, so he just sort of put an arm up against the wall there.
These guys pick up stuff from you, and of course there's nothing like a conversation to pick up things, you know, mannerisms, hand movements, eye movements, you know what I mean? And he would soak this stuff in, he'd store it up. I used to say, you know, so he'd say, you know, he'd have the you-knows in there.
Well, it was in this room where I'm talking to you now, and I came in, you know, and I said, Bob, you know, I hear you're thinking of staying on, and Bob said that, yeah, he was, and I'd said that, you know, you know, that's not what I understood to be the terms of our agreement, and, you know, I thought you were going to go, and, you know, I've been pushing things through the Premier's Conference. I mean, there's an awful lot of work there, and I thought, you know, where's the mileage in this for me if I'm not allowed to run the country?
So when Yarn Event left Channel 9, the people there didn't think it was appropriate that our humour continued, and so we got the boot, and that's how we ended up in the ABC, and which is where we should have been in the first place, but there you go.
I was given the dubious job, among other producers, of producing a Clarke Door segment.
Mr. Howard, thanks for your time.
What's the one, other than global warming, what was the other thing you mentioned you want to cover?
Climate change.
Climate change.
Yeah, climate change.
Climate change.
And it's urgent we do something about this.
Urgent. It's urgent.
You know, there is an irony that in a cutthroat world of current affairs where it's fast-paced and you're constantly moving on, John would just walk in and he'd slow us down and he'd give us a sense of perspective and he'd make us laugh at the issue and the situation, but often at ourselves as well, which was humbling.
Cyclone Malcolm,
yes.
Is that formed yet? Or is
not fully. A number of low-pressure systems are moving there, and it's way south of where we thought it would be. It's a long way south.
Should people be worried about Malcolm?
Well, people should always be worried by a cyclone. There's enormous energy there, even if it doesn't seem to know what it's doing. Can I talk about Bill Shorten on national television?
Yeah, you can.
By
According to this contract, yes, you can.
Right, good. I'll need a bucket, a plunger, some Drano, a hose and a mask. And keep those kids in the car.
Now, you're with the Norwegian government, right?
Yes, that's right.
Yeah. What's your position there?
I'm just near the window.
Mr. Costello, are you happy with the new cabinet?
Yes, indeed. Very good cabinet. Some very good people in there.
Some exciting, fresh new ideas?
You still talking about the cabinet?
He was a word man. He loves words. He loves words and wordsmithing, and wordsmithing is dying now.
Looking back on John's work, it's so broad, you know, there was almost nothing he couldn't do. He wrote books, he wrote poetry. He was a satirist every week on ABC television.
He was a philosopher. He was a social scientist. He had a delight in language, the way we communicate with each other.
The smell of insect repellent and eucalyptus and the distant, constant, slowly listless bang of the flywire door.
You kind of sometimes forget that he was also an actor and a really good actor.
I like your style, Jack. You remind me a bit of myself as a young bloke, to be honest. As soon as the overpass goes in, I can get you a fantastic deal on that. Come in.
Oh, no. No, let's finish with Cheesy might scroll.
Don't worry about your scroll, Brett. Come in.
Come across the front line and you get one of the best production companies in the country.
We thought perhaps we could take them up to the next level. Actually get you to make up and look like the guys you impersonate. What do you reckon?
It's asking me to push OK. I'm not going to get a virus, am I, if I push OK?
I don't know.
No, you wouldn't know. I'm going to push OK. Whoa!
Probably the happiest experience I've ever had on a film was we did a film called Death in Brunswick.
Hi. Hi.
He played my mate in it. I played a no-hoper. He was a sort of solid guy. It kind of echoed life in that way. And I think our friendship sort of bled into that partnership on the screen.
How old is she?
She's beautiful, really beautiful.
How old is she?
She likes me.
I loved working with him on that. It was such a pleasurable experience. And I looked at a little clip from it last night and I thought, we really did something good there. Yeah.
Was that you?
Huh?
Must have been me. Sorry.
John could have gone on to do anything he liked, but he just chose family. Wisely.
It's a kookaburra.
John got married to Helen in 1973, which was about 20 years before any of the rest of us ever thought about getting married, because he'd found the right woman.
They've been mates, Mum and Dad, for over 40 years, and they really knew how to have a conversation. They knew how to thrash out an idea together, and they loved exploring nature together. They were really good pals.
Dad used to say, choice are out of thousands, which of course was his way of saying he was a very lucky boy.
Our whole lives, Luch and I have had people say to us various versions of, what's he like as a dad? I think he was the kind of dad you might imagine him to be. He was mischievous and fun and
supportive, inventive, playful.
And he was an incredible calmer downerer, wasn't he?
The thing I could always get Dad to bite on was if I said, sup.
Yeah.
Sup? What is sup? There's just a violence to the language that he could not tolerate.
He couldn't.
So, endlessly playful otherwise, but that was just, what is that?
Call me back on that number at your earliest convenience, Mr. Clarke. I would be grateful.
After the beep! After the beep! Appraise the bloody beep!
Maybe the message isn't funny enough.
Yeah, you know, studies show that people are more inclined to leave a message if they're funny, John.
Studies show that a lot of studies are crap, Brian.
Bullshit really annoyed him. Management speak really annoyed him.
He just had the ability to cut through bullshit.
Oh, pomposity and bullshit.
And being able to unpack that in a way that, you know, you couldn't be offended because he was right.
Now, Mr. Wilson, we've got a problem, haven't we?
Your problem, mate. That is not good.
No, this is not good at all, Mr. Wilson.
I mean, I guess you've seen the scene from the games about the 100 metres track.
How long is it, Mr. Wilson?
94 metres.
94 metres. Well, we've got a new event, haven't we, Mr. Wilson?
The 94 metres.
In fact, we've got two new events, haven't we? The 94 metres for men and the 94 metres for women.
We thought it would probably end up being a winner, but as with all things, if you look back at that what John delivers in that scene is an approximation of what's on the script. They were going to get John's version of it at that time.
Hello? Dead Builder Proprietary Limited. Yes? Oh, good. Thank you very much.
Oh, it was so exciting. It was so exciting. And when I first, you know, when you walk in the room for the first read through and everything, and sometimes there's a page full of dialogue, like you get a monologue. and I was going, oh, I think I can probably say that in this, that. And I tentatively went to John and said, do you think I could just move this around? He said, oh, cut all that out. I'm just blathering on. Cut all that. I'll just do what you like.
Tobacco sponsorship.
Yep. $25 million.
Well done, Brian. That
Thank you.
really is terrific news.
Good.
Now, here's a number. I want you to go and see if you can get some more.
Yeah.
You ring that. That's the Cambodian embassy. They'll have a number for the estate of the late Pol Pot. See if you can get them to tip some money into a humanitarian sponsorship of some kind. You seem to be pretty good at it.
Was that an ironical reference?
Well spotted.
Oh, he just had a twinkle. He just bring you undone. He could bring Gina Riley undone so easy.
Bye-bye. John! It's gone beyond the...
Every time he came in, he'd do something naughty. And she couldn't hold it together.
John! It's gone beyond the hotels. He's demanding a meeting with you. Sorry. John! I'm sorry. I can't do it.
I had a trick. And the trick was to never, ever look at John's eyes. Always forehead. And if I did that, I was okay. And that's how I got away with it. But there's your party trick gone, Brian.
You know, he would make me laugh all the time, but my quest was to make John laugh. You know, that was the quest of anybody who worked, any comedian who worked with him. That was just like, oh, it was gold if you could make John laugh.
Oh, shit, I'm sorry. Can we... Now, it'll be a hard time for us all. And it'll be a hell of a lot harder for you than it will be for me, which is a shame.
Lads, as you know, there are those who say we cannot win this game. Verily, they be whackers.
Well, wasn't this built so the front wouldn't fall off?
Well, obviously not.
How do you know?
Well, because the front fell off.
In his company, you always felt that you were smarter and funnier than you yourself ever were.
I've often heard people say he'll make you feel like the most important person in the room. And that was something that he got a kick out of.
I think if you think you had a connection to John Clarke, you did have a connection to John Clarke.
I absolutely felt like he was a mentor for us. He script edited the first series of The Adventures of Lano and Woodley.
Oh, you guys are terrific.
Yeah.
I think these scripts are, they're great. I mean, you might want to make a couple of changes, but no, you guys know what you're doing.
You know, and it just meant so much to hear that from him.
Knowing and working with John is a masterclass in not only how to be funny, but how to be a human being.
Humphreys changed the agenda of Australia and John raised the humanity.
John Clarke had enormous intellectual energy, an acute power of observation. I don't think we'll see the likes of Clarke again. To do what he did over such a long period of time.
Oh, John's heading off now.
Oh, there you go.
John once said to me, this is jazz, this is what we do, it's jazz. It was the rhythm of what John and I did. We just somehow naturally understood each other's rhythm, and it was like jazz. And it was free form, and it was, even though we had script, but the rhythm was there all the time. And there's no other performer I've ever worked with that had that, ever.
Oh, John, you funny Kiwi bloke. Could this be some kind of joke? You went tramping down a track and didn't bother coming back. Ah, the sweet simplicity, the beautiful absurdity, too improbable by half. You made us see, you made us laugh, and in a twinkling of an eye, you turned around and made us cry.